My next guest was one of America's youngest self-made millionaires in the field of real estate. Then life threw him a few punches. Now, Russ Whitney is the author of the book, The Inner Voice: How to Unlock Your Passion and Purpose in Life. Many of you probably have a sense that you have a voice inside of you that speaks to you and gives you guidance. But do you listen to it? Well, my guest today, Russ Whitney, is an expert on that very thing, the inner voice. Russ, thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me about this inner voice.
Well, the inner voice is something I started on about 5 years ago. And I had built a number of businesses and written 3 best-selling books. And I was on this path of a money-making path. I was measuring life by making money. And I went through a couple of life challenges, crushings. And, I started to question what's life about? What's the point? What am I here for? Because I was measuring it with new houses, more buildings, another boat. And, there's a whole long story besides that. But I went on this little trek around the world, and because of the size of the business and the books, it gave me access to some of the top business, spiritual, and thought leaders worldwide. And my mission was to find out for me, what's life about? What was the point? I was about 50 years old, and I'd raised my family and built the business, and now I was just feeling like there's more. And so I went on this trek, which has metamorphosed to what's today called Inner Voice. The Inner Voice book that I've written is based on 4 years of traveling the world and me putting these things to evidence. And what I found, first of all, Inner Voice talks in 2 voices. So I talk in the voice of a warrior, which is generally 20 to 40 years old, and I talk in the voice of a statesperson. Now I say warrior. Warrior is 20 to 40 when we're trying to find our way. We don't know a whole lot, and we're in the information gathering era. And we think we know everything.
Now, can this be a man or a woman?
Both.
Okay,
both.
Man or woman?
It's definitely both.
Warrior
sure.
man, warrior woman.
Warriorette.
Okay.
Warriorette is fine. But in the warrior stage, we operate on human training. This is what I found. Selfishness, self-centeredness, arrogance, finger-pointing, judging, blaming, self-pity.
No one does any of that.
Yeah, we all do. And what I found during those years now, for me, I didn't graduate high school. I bought a book when I was 20 years old that said I could become a millionaire. And it was in real estate, and that's, I guess, what I was, quote, famous for. And I did, in fact, do that by the time I was 27 years old. And I had this voice back then in my head that said I could do something better with my life. I didn't know what, okay? And so I started to look at some of these magazines. I got an entrepreneur magazine, and there were some get-rich-quick ads in the back of it. And I started sending away from, and again, got this book. As I go back in time, not only does the book talk in the voice of a warrior or a statesperson, but it then talks about an unconscious and a conscious contact with the inner voice. So back in the 20 era, I would get this aha, the stars are aligned, lucky moment, guess who called me? Well, today I can see, by connecting those dots backwards, there was this inner voice guiding me all along. But I would fight it many times. And in the warrior state, we chase a lot of rabbits, and we don't catch many.
Right.
Because we're running and operating on total self-will. And that's what the book talks about. My first part talks in warrior voice. It's about connecting those dots backwards. Going through an abused childhood, not graduating high school, not having great self-confidence and self-esteem. And all of a sudden, I buy a book that says I can become a millionaire.
It's interesting what you said, Russ, about how we can plot those points backwards in our lives. And I've noticed that in my own life, and it seems like you've noticed it in yours. Are the signs always so obvious? Why are we doing this thing? And what is the relevance maybe going to be later?
Sure. Well, it wasn't, when I wrote the book, okay, I wrote it for the first half of my life where it was an unconscious contact, and I was operating on what I call human training.
Right.
And in the second piece is where I got the information from the travel to kind of go back and piece it together. How does it work? And I've worked with hundreds of people in one-on-one coaching and focus groups throughout these few years to really get evidence that what we're talking about is real. And when I talk about the warrior phase, okay, the warrior phase is the unconscious contact. That's where things are kind of falling into place and we really don't know. We kind of think it's us and we're not sure. In the statesperson phase, what I learned from all of this travel was we start to learn more about humility. and tolerance and patience and the power of humility, tolerance, patience, letting go of resentments, forgiveness, which may seem, fluffy for some people, but I can tell you through my own experience that it's very, very real. So as we go back forward, the whole point of Inner Voice is teaching the difference between the warrior and a statesperson, unconscious, conscious contact. The next piece that's critically important, and the whole point is, how do I find my passion and purpose in life? What am I here for? And that passion and purpose for me and for many others that I've worked with comes from childhood experiences and childhood wounds. And what I mean by that is people think I have a passion for real estate. I had a passion to be a millionaire. And the reason I wanted to be a millionaire is to show all those people in my abusive childhood that I was somebody. All the people who said I was nobody and nothing, that I was somebody. And I thought millionaire would do that, but I was only 20 years old, so,
Right.
What do you know? And then as I got through and I wrote my first book at 27 years old, and I got on a stage to speak, knew nothing about speaking. But all of a sudden, people were coming up to me looking at me as an expert. And it was building my confidence and my self-esteem in self. And what I found here, to give the short version, because I know time's limited on the show, is that I realized that I had a need to help people and save people, whether it's through showing them how to get to financial independence or the inner voice, how to get in touch with their inner voice. I had a need to save people because no one was there to ever save me. And I can tell you the book writing business and the seminar business has probably been the least profitable of any other business I have, but it's the one that makes me want to get up in the morning. It's the one that makes me want to stay late. That's where I found my passion, my purpose. And then,
I think that it's such a big question for people.
Right.
That question, what is my life purpose? Why am I here? What is my purpose of being here on this planet? And some people spend their whole life, looking for the answer to
And
that
never find it.
question, and they never find it.
That's right.
So how do you connect that dot between this voice that's within you saying, try this, do that, it seems random sometimes, and that life purpose, that passion that you're talking about?
Okay, so I don't mean to plug the book, but I will anyway. But the Inner Voice is also a website people can go to. But the way that I have found we find it is in the book and via Inner Voice, there are action programs. So it's not just that we stumble into it. Somebody's got to give us some new information,
Right.
to find the new result. And there's what we call in Inner Voice a discovery chart. And there were numbers of religions and beliefs in a higher power, is what people like to call it. I just call it God because that's what I like.
So it works for you?
Yeah, it works for me, you know what I mean? But some have a little system. We devised our own. It's called the discovery chart.
Okay.
And I went through it myself, and it was amazing for me. We show one how to identify your fears, your angers, and your resentments, okay? So we name was mom, dad, or an institution, or a school, or a bully. So we name those. Then we get to say, you son of a gun, once to them, okay? And then we've got to stop the blaming them, and the chart shows us how to identify what did that do to me. In mine, as I went through and I identified those, it's a simple chart. What I found for me, and I would never have guessed this for Russ Whitney, okay? All the check marks came up to that I was self-seeking and frightened. I never considered myself frightened of anybody. I'm a tough guy, tough in business, build the business.
So this chart allowed you to connect some dots that were maybe in a little bit of a blind spot?
Absolutely, clearly. Not only that, but this is what guides us to the passion and purpose. See,
Right.
I was self-seeking and frightened. I was a cocky, arrogant, self-centered guy, and not mean, but this chart showed me that that's not who I had to be. Because of my character defect of being self-seeking and frightened via child abuse, I built this cocky exterior.
Right.
And what I realized via this chart, and this is another part of the Inner Voice, is we tend to do what was done to us. And I realized that what was done to me by that stepmother and those abusive parents, I was actually doing some of that stuff to other people. When I realized that, that's what made me want to change. I never wanted to ever do to someone, what was done to me. So these action steps in Inner Voice help us go backwards, identify what happened to us, And then why are we who we are? You know, why do we have these certain character defects? And it will illuminate them like that.
Right. It's like a big flashlight.
It is, you know why? Because when we hold the resentment, a lot of times, and I did, and when I say we, I don't want to act like I'm going to know it all on this.
Right.
If this was all taught to me by others, and all I did was take it and put it into Russ speak.
Right.
You know, in the books that I've written, the best comments I've got from those books are, you know, I don't try to talk over someone's head.
Right.
I do it in layman's terms, and it's understandable. You know, you name those resentments, and the idea isn't to try to find every one.
Yeah.
We're trying to find the nature of how that's affected us going into our adulthood.
So make your list.
Make your list.
And then take it a step deeper and make the connection to where that came from?
That's correct. As you go through and it'll say, well, how did this affect you? Emotionally, self-esteem, and you check those. All of a sudden, you'll start to see the checks tally up in the column that's affecting you.
Okay.
Then we take it to the other side, and then it goes to, how did this affect me? Forget about what was done to me now.
Right.
Because, you know, what was done to us wasn't right. There's nothing spiritually or religiously that I've studied anywhere that says that we have to forgive the deed or something bad that someone does to us. We have to forgive the person, though.
Right.
Because not forgiving the person, what they told me, is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
I've heard that before. It is that lack of forgiveness is like holding the poison inside yourself,
Sure
and then
it
it
is.
just lives on and on and on.
And it creates the block to the inner voice.
Right.
How am I going to hear, you know, what that message is if I'm all caught in anger, frustration, and fear, and doubt, and guilt and shame?
You're
to
so
that?
right about that, because I do think that when we have anger and we can't get over things, that's all we hear. We can't hear the other voice that's telling us, you know, to try something new or to have a different viewpoint, because all we can think about is, you know, the crimes or the things that have happened to us that have made us feel, like you said, sad and resentful.
Well, you know, and the people that I coach, and this is anywhere from multimillionaires to business owners to names that you would recognize, right on down to someone that might be a housekeeper or a sheetrocker.
Yeah.
We don't discriminate there, because $10 million anger is no different than $10 anger.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's all the same process, really, for everybody. One of the things I tell people about inner voice is it's a principle and a strategy program. We're not giving advice and opinion. Here's the principle, and here's a new way to deal with that. If you like it, adopt it. So one of the things that I have learned is there's some things that God has given us control of.
Right.
One of them is our thoughts. You know, negative and positivity is a choice. Happy and sad is a choice. Resentment or forgiveness is only a choice if someone teaches us how to get over resentment, and it makes sense. Like learning that the deed wasn't right. I could never forgive some of the things that were done to me, but I could forgive the person. And, you know, real or metaphorically, one of the analogies they gave me was this, is if we look at the story of Jesus in the Bible, nailed up on a cross, okay, the Roman guards are spitting at him and throwing fruit at him and saying, taunting him, jump off. He didn't say, oh, please don't do that. I'm really a good guy. You know, I shouldn't have all this abuse. He said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Because he knew they were so caught up in their own resentments, in their own angers and fears, that nothing you say is going to change someone until they're ready.
So Russ, I'm listening to what you're saying, and it sounds like the first step is to release your anger, to understand the source of it, to let go of resentment. Now, that doesn't sound like it's necessarily easy.
It is not.
But then what's next? Is there something beyond it, or is it just as simple as letting go of anger, resentment, and fear?
Well, the best way I can explain that is inner voice is not something we might read once. It's a way of life. It's not something we hear once. So going back to the beginning of that is the first thing I work with people on, is changing the thought. And then you asked me a question about, is it easy to give up or to let go of resentment or give? No. Sometimes it's a process that has to be done 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 times.
Right.
But each time we do, we'll see a benefit. I've had resentments, you know, when I went through my life crushing business or individuals or bureaucracies that I had to deal with by having a $250 million company and 2,000 employees. And there are some, you know, that I had resentments on that I'm telling you today, you know, 3 or 4 years later, some days that can come back to me because, you know, we've gone through years and years of the human training. It'll come down, and I have to go back and let that thing go again and again. You know, some of them are gone for good, like the abusive parent problem. That one's done. That one never comes back anymore. And there were some other issues along the way. They don't come back anymore.
So I have a question. If someone is sitting at home and they're watching this and they're like, I'm ready. I love what you're saying. I'd like to let go of some fear and resentment. What's that first step?
It takes some coaching. It takes somebody who's got that experience that you look at and say, you know what, identify with that person. There may be some people that are not identifying with Russ Whitney, or maybe you don't like my suit, you know? Or maybe you love what I'm saying.
Right.
They can go to our website, which is innervoice.com, and there's bunches of trainings up there right now. The Inner Voice book will not be out, it's not out now, but it's written and it's in the hands of a publisher. I think we got to get new information to produce that new result. So, do I have a magic answer today in a half an hour show that's going to solve everyone's problems? No. Can we talk about some ideas that might get them thinking on, I want to pursue this and move forward? And the answer to that's yes. You do that through the innervoice.com website or the Inner Voice book.
So to start with. Yes, absolutely. And it sounds to me like a lot of this is about perspective. So if you've only looked at things a certain way for a very, very long period of time, it often takes either a perspective from someone different or new information to shift your view on circumstances that have happened in your life so that you can maybe start to look at things a different way, and that starts to just loosen that grip of fear and anger. Is that right? I think you hit it right on the head, and the start of that is understanding the difference between warrior and statesperson. In the first part of the book, I had some reservations and even editors and focus group people looking at it because I'm talking about how I made money, how I started at 20 and I made money. And as I was writing it, I didn't want anyone to mix this up with a how to make money in real estate book. But as I was writing, I was brief in a lot of those things, and I felt like I was maybe cheating people. Right. So I went back and I did the connecting the dots backwards, kind of like Steve Jobs did. And I tried to do this through an example to show someone else how to do it in their own life. Right. Okay, so shifting the perspective starts with understanding the warrior. Do you have an unconscious or a conscious contact right now? The difference, again, between warrior, statesperson, and looking at the end result. And that is, how do I find my passion and purpose? And I believe as you do the charts in Inner Voice, we find that based on our childhood wounds and our childhood experiences. So my last question for you is, what's the outcome? We're all so result-oriented today. So if we listen to our inner voice and we let go of fear and resentment, what's possible? Wow. If I didn't know better, I would say that has a scripted question. I've been waiting for that. I've been waiting for that the whole time. Right. Here's what I found, okay? When we go to what's life about, I came up with this analogy. Let's take basketball as an analogy. The game of basketball, we shoot baskets. The time clock is an hour, okay? End of the hour, game's over. We know whether we win or lose based on points. So, anxiety, frustration, fear, doubt, gone. I either won or I lost. Game's over, start a new one. What about life? Right. Life, what I have found in the Inner Voice way of life believes that, or Inner Voice way of life believes that life is a daily search for the truth. And it's a daily search for the truth between me and or you and the God or the higher power of my understanding. The time clock is today, because if we're not living in today, each religion I studied said, God didn't build human beings with energy for tomorrow, next week, or next year. So when I'm in tomorrow, next week, and next year, I'm playing the what if game. What about this? What if I can't pay the bills? What if this happens? What if I'm not going to have money for my kids to go to college? And all we find in tomorrow is anxiety, frustration, fear, and doubt. Now, keep in mind, if they all agree that we're not supposed to be living in tomorrow, and that's how God builds, then we certainly can't live in yesterday, because what we find there usually is guilt, shame, and resentment. I coulda, I shoulda, why didn't I? So game of life, search for the truth, and we expand on that in a voice. Time clock today, keeping it in the moment. Now, how do I know whether I'm winning or losing at the game of life? It used to be for me, what deal did I do? What investment did I do? Today, it's what is my ratio at the end of each day of being happy, joyous, and free with the absence of anger, anxiety, frustration, fear, and doubt. That sounds like a good measure. Russ Whitney, thank you so much for being with us today. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.